Ellen H. Fear not, Eclorja, for when it comes to the north, when it comes to the border, well, for Sinn Féin, that's back to basics. In all seriousness, Eclorja, I'm stood here tonight as a Shinner, yes, as a Republican certainty, but above all else, as a believer in this, as a believer in the Good Friday Agreement, in peace on our island, and in a shared future between all of our communities. The opposition tonight have shown their true colours in the tactics they have employed. They have fear-mongered, they have anticipated almost with glee of failure for the movement for unity. They have offered no hope, no resolution, no recourse to the constitutional question. But ladies and gentlemen, I have one request of each and every one of you tonight. I ask that you ignore the theatrics, you ignore the tactics, and that you focus on what the motion before the House truly is. This House believes it's time for a border poll. Ladies and gentlemen, myself and my colleagues' job this evening has not been to convince you to vote one way or another in an eventual border poll. It has simply been to convince you, as we are convinced ourselves, that it is time for a border poll, regardless of the outcome. If it is the case that you leave the chamber tonight entirely unsure of what the result of such a border poll would be, but that you have been sufficiently convinced that now is the time to have it, then my colleagues and I have done our jobs. I ask that you remain cognizant of this at all points tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, the principles of the Good Friday Agreement are simple. They are principles of equality and of self-determination. Principles agreed in good faith and in the spirit of friendship by those of an Irish identity, of a British identity, of both and of neither. The provisions for a border poll is a cornerstone of this. The Good Friday Agreement lays it out in black and white. When it is likely that the majority of people will vote in favour of reunification and the conditions have been met for the border poll to be called, then it is time for a border poll. The only weapon in the arsenal of the opposition to contest the satisfaction of these conditions is opinion polling. We've seen it in both of the previous speakers. So let's address that argument head on. They'll tell us that there's not one opinion poll that suggests that the majority of the people in the 6 counties will vote in favour of reunification, and true that may be. However, neither is there any opinion poll that suggests that a unionist majority would prevail. Neil. In fact, the most recent polling suggests that the number of undecided voters is greater than the gap between nationalists and unionists. The fact of the matter is that opinion polling on such a polarised topic will never account for the undecided voter. It simply is not a measure with which we can place enough weight to dictate the calling of the border poll. So what mechanism do we have to judge the likelihood of a border poll passing? Well, we have real-world votes. We have paper ballots in metal boxes. We have a national First Minister in a system designed to ensure that this would never happen. We have more nationalist MPs elected to Westminster than unionists. We have nationalists in local government controlling the same number of councils as unionists. By every measurable electoral result, year on year from each other, nationalism has leaped forward while unionism falls at each hurdle. If this does not satisfy the likelihood of a border poll passing, then nothing will. Allow me to be clear. The unionist perspective is an important one. It's a vital one in the conversation around unity, but it is an undeniably declining perspective.
Why?
Yes?
If unionism is declining, would it not be prudent to hold off for years until the border poll?
I'll address that later on, thank you. Eclorja, I do fear that oftentimes the conversation surrounding a border poll becomes too fatalistic, too ultimate. There's a perception that we only have one chance. We have to get it right, first try. This way of thinking serves nobody, not unionists, not nationalists, not northerners, not southerners, not the Kerry man nor the Ulster man, as it's ultimately incorrect. The border poll provisions of the Good Friday Agreement prevent more than one border poll occurring in any 7-year period. So I ask, why not now? And if it fails, why not again in 7 years? Eclorja, 7 years ago, Brexit had already been voted on. It was 2016, Trump was already president. It doesn't seem that long ago. So if you are sitting here tonight and you are thinking to yourself that we couldn't possibly have the border poll now, the question that you must answer yourselves is, what do you fear about giving people the choice? We call this the decade of opportunity. If it is truly the decade of opportunity, why not have the border pull now? If it fails, we go back to the basics. We go back to the unionist community. We ask them what they need to hear from us. And in 7 years' time, the decade of opportunity continues to thrive, and we go again. Maybe we go every 7 years, maybe we don't go again. But truly, at the core, there is no risk to having the border pull now. We have nothing to lose. Nationalists will argue that the border pull will pass, and unionists will argue that it won't. It's simple. But why not argue it again in 7 years? The denial of the right to choose is something that in this country we have suffered with for long enough. And so I reiterate my question to you. Why do you fear giving people the option today?
Yourself said, if at any time it seems likely that a majority of those voting would express a wish for a united Ireland, then a border poll shall be called. And you've argued that Sinn Féin are now the largest party, nationalist first militia, nationalist MPs and nationalist councils. But you know what the nationalists in the north do not have? They do not have a majority of the votes. When we look at the voting data from the latest general election, the one that happened this year, yes, Sinn Féin got the most votes, but that is because the unionist vote is more fractured. When you total the votes of the Sinn Féin and of the SDLP, they got 37.1%. When you total the DUP, the UUP, and the TUP, who are even more extreme than the DUP, 40.5. It's close, but it's not a majority.
You know what?
Sure.
You haven't accounted for people before profit who are constitutionally aligned to their socialist status.
I don't think they got a significant amount of vote in the parliamentary election. I can adjust it to 37.2 if you'd like. But let's look at the polling. I mean, you mentioned that UCL now have a working group on Irish unification, and they do, and they've been looking at the polling aggregates. The average support for unification in the north is 35%, the average opposition is 52%. So even if you include the unaligned voters, the polling suggests that it would not pass. In fact, an Aaron's study from 2022 found that 20% of Catholics in the north would vote to stay in the UK at the current time. There's 27% support outright for unification, 66% support in the Republic. You've got to remind yourselves, the Republic is a very different political landscape from the north. In the Republic, the support for unification is twice as high. But let's say we do go and we have the poll. As you said, what is there to lose? Well, scenario one, the likely unionist victory. As we've mentioned before, there's a minimum 7-year wait for another referendum under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. But look at the Scottish referendum. The British government doesn't seem like it will be very willing to give another. The DUP will go, you've had your chance, and they'll block it with every fibre of their being. You know it will happen. 7 years is quite a long time. In 7 years, the UK had 5 different prime ministers, 3 national lockdowns due to a global pandemic, and it left the EU. So 7 years, a lot can change in 7 years, and a lot can be sort of left behind at the end of 7 years. But what's the other scenario? The other scenario is a nationalist victory. And this is unlikely. The polling suggests that it won't happen. But this could actually be worse right now than a unionist victory. Because if they won, it would be by a small margin. It would be a 50+1 majority. It would be like Brexit. It would be very divisive, and it would not be good for Northern Ireland. We had the proposition tonight saying that violence on the streets is fear-mongering. I asked them to look at what happened in the summer in Belfast. Businesses owned by minorities were smashed up. There was... Let me finish, sorry. You should really be alive. It's the rules. In Northern Ireland, there is, as we all know, a history of violence. The Good Friday Agreement got 70% support when it went to referendum, and still there is a rising tide amongst unionists who say that they would not have voted for it if they had a chance to do so now. No surrender loyalism is on the rise. Increasingly, thanks to Brexit and other things, unionists feel like they've been cornered. They feel like they're alone. You can talk all you want about reaching out to them and creating cross-community talks, but that hasn't been working for them so far. If it happens, then we can reevaluate the situation. But currently, the unionist population, they feel backed into a corner. Imagine unification passes by 5%, 2%, less than 1%. Violence would almost certainly be the result. Unionist paramilitaries are once again organising. They're having meetings far more regularly than they used to. The PSNI, you can, like, this is all fairly common knowledge. The PSNI are slightly stressed over this. The worst thing to do right now would be to go border poll. Just, light up a cigarette in a room full of gunpowder. Seamus Mallon, who was the former SDLP deputy leader during the Good Friday talks, he died in 2020, but in 2019, after Brexit, after that had happened, he said that we have to be very careful when approaching a potential border poll. A border poll could trigger violence. Unlike with Brexit, there is a latent threat of violence lurking in Northern Ireland. This is his words, not mine. 90% of loyalists believe that uniting Ireland will jeopardise peace and risk a resurgence in violence in the province. Only 30% of people in Northern Ireland genuinely believe that 50+1 is enough to pass. In fact, 40% believe that the poll would only be successful in uniting Ireland if it had 70% support or higher. So I ask, why now? They've said that nationalism is on the rise, and they're right. They've said that unionism is on the decline. But why would we go and risk the peace we have, risk the relative stability we have in the north, and throw it all away for what? For something that will likely fail, and if it succeeds, it will not succeed in the way we hope it to. It is far better to wait until the clear majority is there, until this can be conducted in a peaceful manner, until we know what a united Ireland looks like. They've stood here and they've been like, let's vote for United Ireland, and they don't even know what it's going to look like. Now is not the time for the border poll. The time for the border poll is when there is genuinely a clear majority, not the clear majority that they claim there is, and when we know what a united Ireland will look like.